Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the new home of power mining analysis. In today's episode, we're going to be providing an update on all of the news and headlines that came out in the Bitcoin mining world this week. In addition to that, obviously halving is forecasted to happen today in about 8 hours. So we're going to be talking about that and the nice little rebound we've seen in the Bitcoin mining stocks and obviously the price of Bitcoin. So a lot to go through this morning. Before we get into it, please take a second, smash the like button, you guys. It's Friday. We'd love the help. It helps push this content to other people who may find it valuable. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join and let us know in the comment section below which of these companies you're currently most bullish on. If you think these organizations are going to be able to meet their exahash targets by year end and your outlook in a post-halving world. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's video. Okay guys, so that's right. Today's video, we're going to be rounding out the week with a nice little news recap for you. We've got our resident Bitcoin mining analyst, Anthony Power. We're going to be going through some of the key headlines this week, including Riot, Core Scientific, and of course Hut 8 Corp. But before we get into that, Anthony, there's a big event happening today. I don't seem to recall what it is. Does anything come to mind for you?
I'm struggling myself at the moment. It's something to do with Bitcoin.
Well,
something to do with rewards.
Halving, Anthony, it's come. The halving is today, and actually, surprisingly, the Bitcoin mining stocks, since our rebound video, I'll say, Anthony, perhaps that was the tipping point, they've seemed to have bottomed, and they're coming back kind of nicely over the last couple days leading into this halving event. And I was just saying before we started recording, it's got to mean that halving has been priced in at this point. I can't imagine there being a lot of more downside pressure on halving a few hours out from the event. But as you always say, Anthony, anything can happen in this space. What are your thoughts today? I know it's expected later tonight. You're going to be on a Luxor podcast as well. How are you feeling about this big fourth epoch of halving?
Yeah, it's a big event in the Bitcoin cycle. Happens every 4 years. The key thing will be what happens post the halving in these early weeks. I mean, if we went back to January and or even to like late in 2023 when the Bitcoin price was like literally half of where it is today, and you had certain analysts and people in the space saying that the amount of hash rate that will come offline is going to be close to 30%. And then in recent weeks, we've seen a number of analysts come out and say it's probably going to be closer to maybe 5 to 10% coming off. So that'll be the interesting part, just to see, as the rewards drop by 50%, how much of the global hash rate will come offline, and effectively that eats into the sort of like the companies that are the most efficient with the lowest energy costs, because they'll be able to stay online, maximize. We're always seeing these companies grow in terms of hash rate, so everything's positive for that way. So, arguably, we've been turning around and saying there's a 50% reduction in block rewards. Well, actually, if you think about it, it's not going to be quite 50%, because if the less efficient miners come offline, then there's more Bitcoin for the more efficient miners that stay online, and that's the way it works. Because what will happen is, the difficulty will be changed every 2 weeks. So when that first difficulty post the halving is looked at, if there's been any drop in the hash rate and it's taking longer to mine a block, longer than 10 minutes, then the difficulty will make it easier, for miners to get rewards and to bring that time back down to 10 minutes. So, there's a positive there for those efficient miners. And we've talked about, those efficient miners. But bear in mind, you can go across the whole spectrum of the miners that we cover on the podcast regularly. And even some of the smaller miners are getting the S21 miners in now. So, they're all reaching out, trying to get those most efficient machines, readiness for the halving, because end of the day, low cost energy, efficient miners, going to be the winning combination. You can still get through with either or of those two. But if you've got low cost energy and efficient miners, you are in the driving seat. You're in pole position, to quote a Formula One.
Totally. And Anthony, what is going to be so interesting? It's so dynamic how Satoshi set this up with the varying degrees of difficulty and the targeted times per block and all the rest. But you're exactly right. That global hash rate is going to be the key metric that I think a lot of people are watching. I've heard estimates as high as 30. I've also heard as low as 5. Going to be very interesting. But with the Bitcoin price, the higher that moves, the economy of or the economics of these less efficient miners become better and better. So it'll be interesting to see that ratio between Bitcoin price and global hash rate. The other thing that we've talked about a little bit this week is the increasing transaction fees. So generally, when we see more attention on the Bitcoin mining space, obviously Halving is a quite large event that a lot of people are talking about. Those transaction fees seem to creep up. That'll help offset that 50% reduction in block reward as well. Now, in addition to that, Anthony, we've also seen the miners have a nice little rebound here over the last couple of days, really depending which of the names you're in. I know IREN obviously having a good little run. TeraWulf had a great run. CleanSpark obviously keeping up with the pack there, no pun intended. So it's nice to see the correlation coming back. Do you think that's going to continue post-halving as well?
I mean, end of the day, if the Bitcoin, I mean, it's all dependent on the Bitcoin price, and the Bitcoin price stays where it is or increases because of that lack of supply available. We know where the demand's coming from. These ETFs are still wanting to buy more Bitcoin, and if that price stays where it is or increases, miners will be achieving more revenues than they were planning to at the start of the year, because the Bitcoin price at the start of the year was about 42,000. So, as it sits today at the moment between 64, 65,000, that's 50% higher than what it was at the start of the year. So they can sort of that's a little bit of a benefit for them. And we had the setback in 2022 when the Bitcoin price dropped to 15,000, and all the miners were still mining then. So we'll expect to see the miners, carry on through. We'll expect to see these transaction fees maybe, have a as it's a halving, maybe this particular month might be a good month. And there are lots of things happening on the Bitcoin, on the blockchain itself, with regards to all these different types of rewards and transactions. So we'll see more of those, and maybe we get someone on the podcast who can sort of enlighten us all and educate us all about what types of fees these miners can look forward to over the next 4 years and what's changing. And when we had the NFTs, 18 months ago, and there's been other things that have come online there, and so that's an interesting part for miners. End of the day, it has to be profitable for mining companies to mine Bitcoin. Satoshi made it that way, so. We've yet to see it where they can't continuously mine and not make a margin. But it's a case of wait and see. The share prices have recovered a little bit the last two days. Not 100% sure it was down to our podcast, but we did time it right. And if the Bitcoin price increased, I'd expect as those margins increase, the share price. Margin increase from a planned perspective, not margin increase compared to what they're doing now, because we know the rewards are dropping. But if the planned margin increase, the better, then that might not be priced into some of these mining stocks. And we did a piece of the valuations, and some of them are looking, significantly undervalued to 2 or 3 of the bigger miners. So there may be opportunities, for people to do a little bit more research into some of these stocks and see if there's some, good value out there to be had at the moment.
Yeah, that's a great point, Anthony. And the other nice thing we're going to have coming up pretty quick here is Q1 results. And Q1 of this year should be blockbuster for most of these companies. So that'll be a real breath of life into the sector as well. As you talk about NFTs and related things like that, Anthony, it's going to be really interesting to see who gets to actually win this final block before halving. I'm curious to see if that'll be the marathon or one of the other pools out there. So moving along, you guys, to some of the recent events this week. We apologize, these are a couple days old, some of them. We were really focusing on halving and some of the big events this week in terms of Bitcoin price. But the one that really probably took the headlines the most would be Riot, obviously energizing Corsicana facility. This is a world-class, really a beacon in the Bitcoin mining industry. And this is starting to come online, as Jason said it would in our interview with him a few months ago. So Anthony, what do you make of Riot and the news from them this week?
Yeah, I mean, this is what we wanted to hear. I mean, they've been saying for quite a while that April was going to be where building A1, which is the first of their buildings that their infrastructure at Corsicana was going to go online, and it's gone online now. And the expectation is that machines will be switched on and installed and switched on as we go now. They haven't stipulated what the initial amount of hash rate that was put on with energization yesterday, but we do know that that the hash rate will be increasing in that facility quite quickly. And building A1 will have a capacity of about 3.7 exahash when it's fully up and running. And then you can also see from the latest photographs that you can see how they're building these structures in a similar way to the photographs we've seen at Childress. The big difference is two things. Obviously, the scale of Corsicana is close to twice the size of Childress in terms of what the capacity will be at the end. This will be a gigawatt site, but also this is 100% immersion cooling. And we've had Dan on the podcast before, and Dan, he doesn't see immersion cooling as the way forward. And I suppose in respect of that, if you think about the amount of miners that have had immersion cooling in their sites as we currently speak, so we've got the Helios site, which is now owned by Galaxy. That's 200 megawatts of immersion cooling in there. CleanSpark have got an element of immersion cooling at some of their sites, and and also you've got Riot Platforms at their Rockdale facility, where they have two buildings, F and G, which were out of action for the majority of 2023 due to the cold weather storms in December 22. But in all honesty, we've not yet to see any indication of how the immersion cooling has been performing since these companies have had it installed. Now, Riot are going all in on this because Corsicana is going to be 100% immersion cooling. They're not even looking at having a backup plan. This is immersion cooling all in. And knowing that they had some issues with the two buildings that were damaged were their immersion cooling facilities. And I know they had to make some changes and get some new parts for those buildings that had to be imported from the UK. And that's probably where the lead times were longer than, generally people are expected. I mean, bear in mind, if you think about how long the Helios facility, the 200 megawatt facility went up there, it was about 7 months. So from breaking ground, 7 months was a 200 megawatt facility. So they really, did something quickly at Dickens County. This one at Corsicana is going to be, significantly bigger than that site there. And you can see the structure at the moment of A1, and with all the, added parts to it there to support that immersion cooling technology on the outside of the build, never mind the inside of the building. And so, I've been asking for 18 months now for any of the miners to come forward and give us more of an indication of what this means. But we'll have to wait and see. We'll get some indication in April's mining update as to how much hash rate they've energized. And it might not be, energized as of today, but they have another literally, just under 2 weeks to switch on as many machines, then show it in that update at the end of the month. And at the same time they're building out Corsicana, remember they're also installing and replacing a significant amount of hash rate at the Rockdale facility. So at the moment the Rockdale facility operates at about 8.6 exahash. That's going to be about 15 exahash when those machines are replaced and an increased amount of machines go into that facility there. So you're going to have 15 exahash at Rockdale, or just over 15 exahash there. And then you're going to have upwards of 16, 17 exahash at Corsicana by the end of the year, taking them to that 31, 32 exahash. And that's only part way to their strategy. They've got a strategy that's going to go significantly above 50. And at the moment, I don't think there's another miner out there that's putting a bigger total to achieve. The one thing I'll say is with all these mining companies, and they put some massive targets out there, we keep going back to who's going to be able to deliver by the end of the year.
Exactly. Execution is key here, Anthony, but it is nice to see things coming along to plan. We're actually scheduled to go down there, I think, the middle of June, so we'll be able to see that facility. It'll be the first time either one of us has actually been to a large-scale facility like this. Plus, it'll be immersion cooling, so it'll be interesting to see how that all works, Anthony. As you say, liquid acts very different than air. definitely in extreme temperatures, and that's what unfortunately happened. And that was obviously Riot's previous experience that took down some of their facilities for upwards of a year, right? So we'll be interested to see how that one comes. Congratulations to Jason and the team on energizing that. And as I say, biggest facility in the world for Bitcoin mining. So really a beacon in the space. So Anthony, the next one on our list here is Core Scientific. But before we move on, anything remaining on Riot that you want to discuss?
Yeah, I mean, Riot put out another SEC document this week, and basically they're getting an AGM taking place in June this year, and one of the votes on that AGM is to increase the amount of shares that are available then for them to use, as an ATM, and it's being increased from a current amount of 340 million shares to a total of 680 million shares. So if you look at today's share price of between $8 and $9, that's probably close to about another 3 billion in actual amount. So most of the mining companies have come out and suggested an amount in dollars, and shares sold up to that amount. But in terms of Riot Platforms, they've gone and asked for the number of shares to be increased. So it gives them the opportunity then to go out and utilize, those shares and sell them, as they grow out this site at Corsicana. And, we know they've got a sort of like a future target of 100 exahash, and that's got to be paid for. So you can see the development of Corsicana is one area of cost, the actual infrastructure cost. But then we know that when you're putting these orders in for the mining orders, you need some serious money, and that's going to to get another 70 exahash on top of what they're going to achieve by the end of the year. That's going to be is going to be significant amounts of money. So they're probably planning how they do that now. The impact will be is what impact does that have to the share price? Not just because all the news came out, the share price has dropped, but all the share prices have dropped in the last few weeks. Even though the Bitcoin price has continued to sort of like to rise since the start of the year. But if they're going to be selling shares on a daily basis, that's going to have some suppression on the share price. We've seen that happen with other mining companies. I think so IREN also had an ATM in that first part of the year to get their funding available for their site at the Childress site there, and growing and buying the machines to get them to 20 exahash. And you can look back now and say that their share price was obviously a little bit suppressed because of the continued selling during that period. And we know they've been selling because they articulated that they've got $300 million in cash. When if you think back to what they had at the end of December, it was 90 million in their last audited update there. So that's grown over 200 million, and they've been spending money as well. So you could say they've utilized a significant amount of the 500 million ATM they had in place. So it's we know the companies have got to grow. We know that debts is a challenge for companies. So the ATM, selling Bitcoin, are the only really big levers that miners have got to operate. I know some are coming out with a few more inventive ideas of how to do this, but the main emphasis will be on companies have been selling Bitcoin, using ATM to grow, and hopefully down the line we see the shareholders also benefit from this, because at the end of the day shareholders are seeing their percentage of their allocation sort of like dwindle. And bear in mind, I think at the last count, I think there are about 250 million shares in issue at the moment. So between 250 and 680, so that gives them over 400 million shares to utilize over the period of the of this increase. And so yes, it gives them sufficient funds, but at the same time it does impact on the share price. And for people thinking it's going to get back to what it was in 2021, where the share price touched $80, you need to bear in mind all the dilution since 2021 mean that the share price would have to the price of Bitcoin would have to significantly increase. We're talking, maybe 5, 6, 7-fold from where it is at the moment to see those share prices again with the number of shares in issue.
Yeah, it is a significant amount of shares, Anthony, and I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people don't really realize that or think about that when they're looking at previous all-time highs of companies. You need to understand how many shares were available at that point in time when it hit that all-time high. But as we've learned with these ATMs, Anthony, just because they're approved to do it doesn't necessarily mean they have to do it. And Riot has also been very active in terms of building up their HODL. It doesn't look like they want to sell any Bitcoin, so maybe they're using this just as a potential backdoor option if needed to get to those higher exahash goals like we just talked about. Interesting though, like you said, that they've used the absolute number of shares rather than the overall value of the ATM like we've seen with some of the competitors or peers. So that's one to keep an eye on, you guys. Next up is Core Scientific. So this one's interesting to me, Anthony, also related to expanding their facilities, completing some buildings that are partially built. But what was interesting is based on that discussion with Adam Sullivan, the CEO, and the fact that they actually have to sell their Bitcoin each month to meet, or each day to meet debt requirements, it was interesting to see that they've now got some money and some life to pump and reinvest back into this business. Very exciting as I take it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, they've announced an expansion of their facilities in Denton in Texas. And, they're looking to add an additional 72 megawatts of power capacity to that Denton site by the end of Q2, so by the end of June. And that's going to cost approximately about $200,000 per megawatt there. So that's about $15 million. Now, we do know, because we know on a daily basis, that Core Scientific have been mining 28 to 30 Bitcoin every day since like the start of the year. And so, when you think about the Bitcoin price, where it is now, where it was at the start of the year when they came out of Chapter 11, the revenues that they're achieving are significantly higher than expected. And so, you could argue an assumption there is that they've got more funds to sort of play with at the moment and to sort of like grow maybe a little bit quicker or highlight some changes quicker than they maybe initially expected to. So this is a good update. I mean, I don't think anyone was expecting a company that came out of Chapter 11 with, a significant amount of debt on the balance sheet, albeit the way that debt's structured is there's low interest payments in the early years of the debt, and then they sort of ramp up. But they've got things in place that if the share price gets to certain levels, then warrants will get triggered, and that the funds that are received for the warrants being purchased will cover the majority of that debt. So it's like it was very cleverly put together. Adam came on the podcast, explained all about the situation with the two warrants. And believe you me, we got a lot of thanks for that, because, people are asking so many questions out there. And there was even people in the company were sort of like, struggling to understand it. So Adam came on, articulated that. If you haven't seen that podcast, go and find the podcast. Have a look back at what Adam's talked about in that podcast there. Really optimistic about Core Scientific. It looks like they could be the sort of like, the phoenix rising from the flames here, because it seems to be that they're managing to do what it says on the tin every day. We've had the issues of production from some of the miners, and notably, Marathon Digital, who've got 10 exahash more than Core Scientific in terms of self mining, and yet they can't match Core Scientific Bitcoin for Bitcoin in this year, and nor could they have matched it in any of the previous years either. So we'll see how that goes for the rest of the year. But at the moment, after Q1, Core Scientific are taking the pole position in terms of production there. So a good update there. They've even talked about the potential to boost the hash rate by a further 20 exahash. So they're not sort of like mentioning, although the growth this year is relatively small, it gets them to about 21.8 exahash, which when you think they're at 19.3 at the moment, I think, so that's just another couple of more exahash. But they're now starting to talk about, further expansion, further rate of 20. So that's like following the likes of Riot, following the likes of Marathon, following the likes of Core Scientific. And I'm sure, as we get closer to the end of the year, some of the other miners who are looking to get to 20 will start showing you what their 2025 strategies look like. And so it just seems to be, for about 6 or 7 of the miners at the moment, it seems to be a hash rate race, really, just to get as much hash rate quickly installed through this like bull cycle to make the most of it. But yeah, it's a good update for Core Scientific, and I think it's caught a few people out there. I don't think they're expecting these type of updates so soon as they came out of Chapter 11.
Yeah, very exciting. I was surprised to see this one too, Anthony. And yeah, when we talk about execution and consistency, really Core Scientific is unmatched. as I understood it, if and when the share price reaches that target for the first round or tranche of warrants, and there's actually companies out there that will go buy in the money warrants, and Adam explained that as well. That will be enough proceeds to essentially wipe their debt. So if and when that event happens, that could be a major tipping point or catalyst for Core Scientific. So definitely a video.
One point I just want to add to that, Bryce, is as well as the good news on the self-mining, Core Scientific are bringing out updates about high-performance computing as well. We never expected that. So they've allocated, I think, about 16 megawatts to support, high-performance computing. And the numbers talked around there are sort of like, in a scale of about 100 million in revenue. So they haven't come out and said what the margins on that will be, and we'll wait to see that there. But we know that other companies have come out and mentioned what margins they're getting. And, we'll see the Q1 results from Bit Digital, because we know that Bit Digital have received in the region of about $10 million in the first 3 months of the year. And what will that look like when you apply the cost of that $10 million? Then we'll see the margins. Now, Sam's come on the podcast and said the margins in HPC currently, or even if the Bitcoin price was 100,000, are better for Bit Digital. So, the likes of Core Scientific coming out with that update about high performance computing, this again is something that wasn't mentioned, in 2023 for obvious reasons. But this is another positive story that they're coming out with.
Yeah, good old Adam is fixing the airplane while it's in flight, hey, Anthony? Very interesting development. Yeah, for me, it's going to be margins, and it's going to be how much CapEx is required to set up these custom AI HPC hosting agreements, and then what is the lifespan of these units and chips, right? Because as we've seen with anything technology related, even the newest NVIDIA chips are not very new in 3 or 6 months anymore. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out. We also have IREN on the channel Monday, specifically talking about AI. So that'll be a really interesting one if you have questions about that sector or vertical of the market. Now, the next company also going to be talking about Texas, Anthony. Texas might have to change their state flag or something to a Bitcoin mining rig here pretty soon. Yeah, Bitcoin. So Salt Creek. So this is a pretty exciting development for Hut 8, because this is really one of the key first steps under Asher's new leadership, right? So he came in, he made some moves. They shut down Drumheller. It wasn't a very profitable site, very decisive move. He came on the podcast, said, hey, you guys, you're going to start to see the impact of this probably in Q2, Q3 of this year. So stay tuned. And then they just came out with this update. What's incredible about the Salt Creek, Texas location to me, Anthony, is they only broke ground on this 78 days before they started energizing. This was a greenfield site, just literally a piece of dirt. And in 78 days, they've now energized a third of the facility. It's a 63 megawatt site, and they're doing it. They're expecting or forecasting that their cost to mine is going to be about 30% lower here compared to some of their hosted sites. So for me, this was a really strong showing, not only on execution, but on timing. Yeah, coming in on time and a lot lower in terms of cost compared to some of their competitors in terms of build out costs, Anthony. So I thought a very bullish update for Hut 8, and hopefully one of many that we start to see here as we move into Q2, Q3, Q4 of this year. What were your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this is the sort of like news that some of the investors will be hoping for. We want some green shoots, because they've had a bit of a sort of a challenging time over the last couple of years. The share price, go back to 2021, Hut 8 were one of the most popular shares. You think CleanSpark are popular now. Hut 8 were in that sort of position back in 2021, along with Hive Digital. So, two of the oldest mining companies publicly listed out there, were real fan favorites. And, at one point, Hut itself, this is not the merged Hut, this is Hut 8 on its own, reached a market capitalization in 2021 of about $2.5 billion. Now, if you look at what the merged market capitalization of both companies, and it was a joining of two equals, so you can effectively say, twice the size of the original Hut 8 in terms of assets, their current market capitalization is probably between 600 and 700 million. So that tells you how popular this share price was during that period there. But again, it was the challenge then of actually growing hash rate for them. And they did things like, they moved into HPC. They were an Ethereum mining company, along with Hive Digital, and were doing really well during the Ethereum period. That probably, again, was a really good reason why, shareholders were rallying around those two companies at the time. But when that Ethereum fork happened back in September 2022, and the revenues were switched off, and we're talking 95% margins on Ethereum mining. These were significant numbers, and they were growing their GPUs in both those companies significantly. So, they've been through a challenging, 18 months, 2 years, and now we're starting to see these are the news stories that the last couple of months we've seen some good updates. The fact that they're leaving their sites and handing them back over to Marathon, who've purchased them, but they've got a buyout clause there of over $13 million. And they probably put that money to good use in getting this facility up and running. So, as one door closed for them, another door's open. So, we'll watch with anticipation over these next two-quarter updates to see where the improvement's coming from, and see if we can get hooked back to where they were back in 2021, back into that sort of like the higher echelons in terms of being a favorite miner once more.
The glory days, they call that at Hut. Yes, but it will be interesting, Anthony, with Hut. We just talked about their valuation as well in our most recent podcast. So it'll be interesting to see how that thesis or theory plays out here over the next few quarters. Now, before we wrap up, I just was cruising on X here and saw breaking news, Anthony. For the first time ever, it's 2 hours into the trading day now, GBTC hasn't sent any Bitcoin to their Coinbase premium account this morning. So that's a very unique and interesting development. Not sure if that's going to be just timing, or maybe there's a delay for some reason, or perhaps we didn't see any outflows for the first day since the ETF launches. But that's going to be interesting to see with this halving epoch happening, 450 Bitcoin coming offline now forever. How are these ETFs going to fill up these buy orders, especially if GBTC isn't actively selling anymore? And I saw another post yesterday. Bitcoin on exchange continues to fall, you guys. It's at multi-year lows. So it's going to be very, very interesting when this supply-demand mismatch meets and we start to see the price really start to move. So Anthony, I'll pass it back to you for any closing thoughts, but I thought that was worth throwing in just because it's a very interesting observation, at least.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's been consistent since since the start of the year is the fact that GBTC have been offloading Bitcoin significant amounts each day. Fortunately, on most of those days, those Bitcoin have been snapped up by the spot ETFs that were approved in January, and it was just a matter of time before the Black Rock ETF was actually held more Bitcoin than the Grayscale. I think it's very close now. It'll probably happen maybe by the end of April. But it's all the fact that they're not releasing any today, although be it it's probably still morning in the US. It's getting towards late afternoon here in the UK, and maybe there's still time for them to do it. But that if they don't take it, you can see that maybe they believe Bitcoin is priced into the halving, and now there's potentially some upside coming forward. So it's all we know that sort of 5 or 6 of the miners have been doing the same with their production. They're not selling as much as they used to. You go back 5 months ago, and most of the miners were selling their monthly production in full. And not going into the hodl, but selling their production runs in full. And this last sort of 3 or 4 months, we've seen, and it was started by CleanSpark. They had 400 Bitcoin at one point last year, and now they're over 5,000 Bitcoin. But other miners have jumped in and done the same. Hive Digital have hardly sold any Bitcoin over the last 2 or 3 months. Riot Platforms hardly sold any Bitcoin in the last 3 months. So they're also 2 firm believers. Marathon have grown their hodl, which at the end of March had a valuation of about $1.2 billion just in Bitcoin hodl, added to the fact they had about 300 million in cash in the treasury, so that had 1.5 billion. And Riot Platforms had a significant amount of hodl with about $700 million in cash, and they were sort of not far behind, maybe 1.3 billion in total. So These mining companies have, half of them have sort of like looked at the hodl. The other half have been, consistently selling on a daily basis and putting their case forward for doing that. So it's going to be interesting how this one turns out. I mean, if we are at the start of the bull cycle, like people believe we are, we maybe got a year, 18 months to go through this process. Maybe these miners are thinking that's an opportunity to have that hodl there. Time will tell.
Exactly. It sure will, Anthony. And this is why, you guys, you be patient, you stick to your due diligence and your thesis, and you don't get scared. We have increasing demand through the ETFs. We have a reduction in supply through the halving. Bitcoin miners are a proxy to Bitcoin. It's all going to make sense. It's all going to work. We just have to give it time to play out here, Anthony. You guys, thanks so much for watching. It's Friday. Hit the like button. Go have a great weekend, you guys. We're going to be doing a live podcast with Sebastian on our channel at 10 a.m. tomorrow Mountain Time if you'd like to tune in. If you have any comments, questions for us, leave them in the section below. Make sure you subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you tomorrow.